hear me? Because Morgan was cutting in and out for me. Is the volume okay for everyone?
The volume seems okay.
Perfect. Thank you. Well, I was going to say hello to everyone, and we understand that you folks are calling in from across the country from different time zones. So we appreciate you taking the time from your busy day to join us today, and we hope everyone is staying safe and healthy. On behalf of the Commission, I want to start by expressing my deep gratitude to the nation's public servants, medical professionals, military service members, and volunteers who are working tirelessly to stem the spread of the COVID-19. And in every community, service is front and center. The U.S. Public Health Service has deployed officers to assist the CDC with health screening, active, reserve, and National Guard service members, as well as retired military members are assisting with responses. Our teachers are adjusting to the new normal, teaching over the internet, and youth are still continuing to learn. And our national service members are still delivering meals to homebound seniors and helping public health officials at all levels are leading this fight. So we appreciate everything that is being done to help us address this pandemic today, and appreciate you folks taking the time out of your day to join us. It is this American spirit of service and how we fully unleash the power and potential to meet our community's challenges. That is the focus of our Commission's report and our town hall today. And after 2.5 years of extensive research, public hearings, conversations with Americans across this country, the Commission released its final report, Inspired to Serve, on March 25th. So I hope everyone had an opportunity or a chance to take a look at our website at inspiredtoserve.gov and had read our executive summary. And if you're really industrious, read our 255-page report and subsequent legislative annex. Or if not, hopefully you at least caught the 5-minute recap video. But if you haven't, no worries. Today we'll provide an overview of the report and open it up to your questions. And before we dive in, I want to thank the many individuals and organizations that have supported the Commission's work, many of you who are on this call today. So thank you again for everything that you have done to support us. Congress created the Commission in the National Defense Authorization Bill in 2017 as a body with 11 members selected by congressional leadership and the President. And Congress entrusted us to conduct a review of the military selective service system and to consider methods to increase participation in military, national, and public service in order to address the national security and other public service needs of the nation. This is the first time that the American history that a commission was tasked to comprehensively and holistically review the selective service system and all forms of service. And our report contains a bold vision and comprehensive plan to strengthen all frames of service and to address critical security and domestic needs, invigorate civil society, and strengthen our democracy. So over the last 2.5 years, the Commission has conducted extensive research. We traveled to all 9 census regions, visited 22 states and 42 cities. We held 24 public hearings and meetings, received over 4,300 public comments, and over 530 organizations met with us. And so we found that as was 200 years ago, in the earliest days of our nation, America's extraordinary spirit of service continues to shape our nation. And Americans routinely step up in support of each other, offering their sweat and ingenuity when needed and without expectation of anything in return. I'm sure a number of us can point to a number of our neighbors and ourselves during this current pandemic in stepping up and meeting the current challenge. So yet in a nation of 329 million, we have yet to unlock the full transformational potential to address critical national and local needs and reinforce the civic fabric of American society. Our vision of a nation in which service is a common expectation and experience for all Americans, when it is the norm, not the exception, when every American is inspired and eager to serve. Our commission is hoping that by the year 2030, 70th anniversary of President Kennedy's call for Americans to serve their nation, We envision 5 million Americans will begin to serve in military, national, and public service each year. This would include more than enough qualified individuals serving in the armed forces, minimizing the need for traditional military recruiting. 1 million individuals annually taking up federal supported national service opportunities, modernizing our government personnel systems to attract and enable Americans with critical skills and new generations to enter the public service. Our longtime goal is to cultivate a culture of service in which individuals of all backgrounds are aware of, have access to, and inspired to participate in opportunities to serve their communities or the nation. Service, beginning at an early age and continuing throughout one's lifetime, develops skills and leaderships among those who participate, maximizes federal investment in pursuit of local, state, and national solutions, helps develop the nation's workforce, and brings people together to meet the critical needs of the nation. Most importantly, enhancing the country's culture of service will invigorate civic life and strengthen foundations of the Republic. Our recommendations to address civic education, the federal workforce, national service programs, and military service and selective services. So I will now turn it over to Commissioner Tom Kilgannon, who will share more of our recommendations and to elevate on advanced service. Thank you.
Great, Deborah, thank you so much. I really appreciate that introduction, and I want to say thanks to everybody who's joining us on the call today. It's great to be here, and I'm glad that we could get together in this format to be able to talk about the report. I'm going to take a little bit of time today and talk a little bit about national service and about public service, and then turn it over to my colleague Ed Allard, who will talk a little bit about military service. But I wanted to begin with really an observation about our final report, and I'll go right to the very beginning, and that's the cover and the title, and it's called Inspired to Serve. And that title to me is important because it says a lot and it means a lot. Inspired to serve, that's what gets me motivated, to see people who are willing to jump in and roll up their sleeves and do the hard work that's going to make our nation and our communities better. And we see that, as Deborah pointed out, with so many people who are on the front lines of the COVID pandemic right now, who are giving of their time and their talent, and really, I guess we could say, putting their lives on the line, because it's a very dangerous pandemic. But it is those kinds of people who give their time to put on a uniform, to save a life, to teach our kids, who give of themselves in service, that get me motivated and inspire me. And that's why I was so happy and proud to be a part of this commission. And it's that kind of individual engagement and the high participation rate which is required for our republic to be a success. And so, those are just a few of the examples of the kinds of work that people are doing right now. It happens every day. And it really begins, and this culture of service, our history of service, begins with civic education. And as you have had the opportunity to look at our report, you'll see that we devote a good deal of time and energy to civics education. And there's a reason for that. Because as we began our research and we started looking at these topics, there was a great deal of attention brought to us about the idea of civics education, whether we were in classrooms or meeting with parents or teachers or students, coaches or business leaders. The idea that America needed to invest more in civics education, that our students needed to be better grounded in civics education, was a theme that arose again and again and again. And that is also coupled with not just civics education, but the idea of service learning. And this is something that service learning integrates classroom learning with community service projects, so that kids get a hands-on experience and are better able to understand the material that they're learning. And so the Commission is putting forth recommendations that will strengthen civics and service learning to help our students better understand the communities in which they live, our system of government, how different levels of government work with one another and should work with one another. And this is, it's incredibly important, because as we speak, we are witnessing the need for a strong civics education. We're having a national debate right now about really, I think, each of the components of the First Amendment, and yet 37% of Americans don't know any of the rights that are enumerated in the First Amendment. But yet, if you turn on your TV and watch what's going on, we're having debates about federalism, about federal government versus state government, and where the responsibilities are, the free exercise of religion, the right of people to peaceably assemble, and so it is. Today's environment is testament to the idea that we need a strong civics education in America, and we need to get kids not only understanding, because if they don't understand where their rights come from, they're not going to have an appreciation for what their responsibilities are as citizens, and they're not going to be able to influence and make this republic all that it can be. And we also want a strong civics education so that our kids will aspire to be the leaders that we want them to be. You know, our kids, they want to be entertainers and they want to be professional athletes because that's what they see and that's what they understand. But if they could see and understand and have a better appreciation for the responsibilities of the Speaker of the House or a federal judge, maybe they would aspire to those kinds of positions as well. And a strong civics education will help them do that. And so in our final report, of the 164 recommendations that we have, we're putting forth recommendations for a federal investment in both civics education and service learning. It's the only place in the report where we make a specific request of funding for a program or for an idea. And that is, we're asking for $450 million to be split roughly equally between civics education and service learning. The civics education part would be $200 million going to the Department of Education to be spread out amongst the states and communities where this responsibility rightfully lies, but give them the investment so that they can boost and get civics back into the classroom and begin teaching it and teaching it well. And we would ask Congress to put $250 million toward a service learning fund that would be administered by the CNCS, the Corporation for National and Community Service, so that kids could have more opportunities to participate in good, worthwhile projects that will help them understand the academics that they're getting in the classroom. And all of this is to really get to our ultimate goal, which is by 2031, as Deborah said, that's the 70th anniversary of President Kennedy's Ask Not What Your Country Can Do for You speech. But by 2031, we want to ensure that every student in America is exposed to a quality civics education. And by 2031, we want every 4th, 8th, and 12th grader in America to test at or above the proficient level in civics, according to the National Assessment of Educational Progress test that is administered in the schools. So that's a little bit about where we begin with civics education and service learning. And once our kids have a grounding in civics and they're inspired and they want to do more, obviously we want them to look for opportunities in national service. And in this area, there's opportunity, but we need to make kids more aware of it. We really look at national service in this way. We want to increase awareness, we want to increase aspiration, and we want to increase access to national service. By awareness, we mean nearly 1/3 of millennials are unaware of any of the opportunities in national service, whether that's in the Peace Corps, whether that's in AmeriCorps, or Senior Corps, or teaching opportunities. They just don't know that they exist. So we've asked Congress to give to the CNCS, to AmeriCorps, some funding for a public awareness campaign that would help not just young people, but their influencers, teachers and parents and coaches, to be able to guide them should they have an interest in getting involved in some national service program. And then with respect to aspiration, Deb stated at the outset that overall we have a goal of 5 million Americans, and 1 million of those we would like to see in national service. We want to increase the number of students who are participating in national service programs and get that up to 1 million by 2031. And in order to do that, we need to make it a little bit more accessible. And there are a few ways we can do that, and our recommendations lay that out. First is by increasing the living allowance for those who are participating in AmeriCorps. We heard a lot about this as we met with AmeriCorps alumni and volunteers, that it's just as much as young people want to give of themselves and help their community and roll up their sleeves, it becomes very difficult when you might have to rely on other government programs just for basic living. The current level of funding for an AmeriCorps volunteer is just above the poverty line right now. And so we're putting forth a recommendation to increase that, as well as to increase some of the funding for some of the senior programs like the foster grandparent. In those cases, it's actually kind of embarrassing what those people are making with all the incredible effort that they're putting forth. It's only about $2.70 an hour that they're being paid in order to do this incredible, great work. And of course, there is the Siegel Award, which is an educational award, and we're putting forth a recommendation to eliminate the taxation of the Siegel Award and make it more competitive with other education awards. But those are some of the recommendations that we have with respect to national service. And I want to turn to public service because, as we talked about, we just see so many great public servants out there today. People who are on the front lines of the coronavirus pandemic and what they're doing in hospitals and on our Navy ships and in so many areas across the country, people putting their lives on the line. And we see that again and again. We need these people not just today, but we need them for future emergencies, whether that be a cyber attack, a terrorist attack, a natural disaster. We need good, capable people, talented people who are able to respond and do so in a way that they are out there giving of their time and talent to be able to take care of these things. And those are in emergency situations. But we also have day-to-day needs that I think sometimes we take for granted. We have great public servants who are caring for our national parks, who are teaching in our schools, who are protecting our borders, who are policing our streets, who are practicing diplomacy around the world. We need these people, and if we don't have them, we will see their absence. It will become obvious. And so in order to do that, we need to do some things in the federal government, in the hiring system, to be able to attract the best and the brightest and to retain them. And one of the things we have to do is to reform the federal hiring system. We have some old and outdated rules that make it difficult to hire the best and the brightest. And so we're looking at a comprehensive plan to fix hiring, to engage the next generation in public service, and empower federal agencies to build and manage talented workforces that are going to be able to better serve the American public. So to attract that talent and fix the federal hiring process, this is where we begin. And we do so because it takes, on average, about 3 times as long to hire a talented person into the federal workforce as it does with the private sector. Now, if we want our government to be nimble and more competitive, we need to begin by fixing federal hiring. And if you think about it this way, what kind of a signal do we send to a new federal worker if it takes us months and months and months to bring them on board? But if we can do so quickly and deliberately and put them to work quickly, we're going to give them a much stronger signal to say, hey, we want you out there. We want you working on behalf of the taxpayer. We want you doing the very best you can because we did it when we hired you. And that's where we begin. So we need to set a high expectation for our federal workforce, and it needs to begin with the hiring process. A few of the ways we can do that and a few of the recommendations that we have for it is to overhaul the USA Jobs website. We've heard quite a bit about that. Not a lot of it was positive. That is first and foremost where we need to begin. Secondly, we need to have better job descriptions. When we go out to the American public and we're looking to bring people in, we need to have more clear, more concise, and better job descriptions that describe what it is we want them to do and how to do it. We want to have more proactive recruiting on behalf of the agencies. They know what they need. They know what they want. Let them go out and get it. And then we want to fix the process to determines whether or not these applicants are qualified. As it's currently set up, applicants can fill out their application and determine by themselves whether they're an expert level or lesser. And of course, if you're looking for a job, you're going to mark yourself as the best in every category when that may not be true. But we're putting forth some recommendations that will fix that and will allow others to come in and support the Human Resources Department to be able to help determine the qualifications of applicants. Next, we need to focus on bringing in new talent. Currently, about 1/3 of the federal workforce is going to be eligible for retirement in the next 5 years. And that means there's a lot of talent, there's a lot of knowledge, there's a lot of know-how it's going to leave with them if we don't bring in a new workforce. I mean, think of it this way. If you're running your own nonprofit organization or your own small business, and much of your staff is about to retire and take all those great customer relations, all the knowledge about how to, how the factory works or the processes work, you want to bring in others, download that information to a new team so that your business is going to thrive. And that's the situation we're looking at in the federal workforce, and we need to fix it. So in order to bring in more young people, we are looking at, we're putting forth a recommendation to establish a public service corps that would be similar to an ROTC that would partner with colleges and universities to put forth the opportunities for public service and inspire people toward wanting to work in the federal government, and creating a center that would streamline fellowship and scholarship opportunities across the federal government so that the accessibility would be there more readily. And then finally, for the long term, we want to replace the current federal personnel system with a more flexible and modern talent management approach that would allow agencies to recruit and retain the workforce that they need to be competitive and to be as capable and excellent as they can on behalf of the American public. So those are some of the recommendations that we have both in national service and public service. And in just a moment, my colleague Ed is going to talk a little bit about military service. But before I turn it over to him, there are two more recommendations that I want to point out to you, which will bring it all together. One of the things that we tried to do with our final report and in our deliberations is to not look at these streams of service in silos, but to find ways to integrate them and make them be able to strengthen each other by working together. And so one of the ideas we have for that is the Commission is putting forth a recommendation to create an online service platform that would allow nonprofits and federal agencies and state governments to be able to push out to people who are registered with the platform their opportunities and what their organizations do and the opportunities they have for people to serve. And that would be one way to consolidate this flow of information about service. And secondly, there is another recommendation that the Commission is putting forward to create a council of military, national, and public service within the executive office of the president, so that that individual could work to be a traffic cop of sorts, to integrate military, national, and public service efforts, to coordinate them, to help them strengthen one another, and to be able to make sure that the resources of the federal government with respect to service are being used in the most efficient way possible. So those are just some of the recommendations we have. I will be looking forward to your questions as we move on. First, I want to turn it over to Ed Allard, who's going to talk a little bit about what we're putting forth in terms of military service and selective service.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Kilgannon, and our Vice Chair, Commissioner Wada. I also thank our audience for their interest and attention in participating in this. Am I on? I can't tell. Hello?
Yes, you're on.
Okay. Clearly, the defense of our nation depends upon the continued success and strength of our military. The all-volunteer force must remain strong, sustainable, and able to recruit individuals with skills necessary to meet the current and emerging threats. However, Americans are less connected to the military than ever before. The growing civilian-military divide poses challenges to military recruitment in the years ahead. We've learned that fewer than 1 in 5 young adults can identify all 5 branches of the military. The Commission recommends several steps to narrow the civilian-military divide and increase awareness of military service. Ensure the military attracts the most qualified candidates. Our recommendations include improving military outreach and providing greater access to military bases and facilities via public tours, partnership between National Guard, reserve units, and local schools, and enhancing promotion of military service by members of Congress. Increasing opportunity for youth to explore service by expanding the JRO2 Junior Reserve Officer Training Corps and other youth programs. And promoting administration of ASVAP, that's Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Board, CEP, which is a Career Exploratory Program, Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery, to enable students to learn more about service, become familiar with military opportunities, and how their strengths can be translated into a military career, along with other service options. The shrinking percent of Americans participating in the military service makes recruiting much more difficult. Since exposure to military and coming from a military family increases the propensity to serve. Specifically, the Commission recommends investing more resources for recruiting in underrepresented markets and hometown recruiting efforts to help meet recruiting goals and ensure the United States military reflects the nation. Providing additional support for individuals to pursue degrees and certification through technical and vocational programs in return for an enlisted service commitment, and increasing flexibility for military to move persons between military components and to recruit individuals from private sectors with key skills like cyber, health, and engineering. These expanded youth pathways and outreach efforts will significantly increase engagement between the military and the broader American public. It will also shatter mysteries and myths and provide a new generation of Americans with firsthand information about military life. As we were going through this, we discovered that oftentimes the perception of the youth of the military is that which they see in commercials and TV, indicating that it's lock and load and go break down the door. That isn't necessarily the case. There are many, many opportunities for people to serve in the military that translate directly into a lot of the activities that they experience as civilians. Although the all-volunteer force is the first line of defense, after we intensive study, we concluded that the selective service system is an essential element of the nation's military preparedness to meet future national security needs. Therefore, we determined that the selective service system must be maintained and improved to be prepared to meet a national emergency that would require mandatory military service. The risks are simply too high to put the selective service system into standby. Along the way, we came up with some recommendations to modernize the national mobilization system, prepare for the national defense of our nation in a national emergency, and to educate the public about their solemn and civic duty. Specifically, the Commission recommends the President designate a lead official in the NSC, National Security Council, to oversee the full range of national mobilization needs, and that the Secretary of Defense designate an executive agent to focus on military personnel requirements for national mobilization. We also recommend that the government entities responsible for national mobilization conduct regular exercises to strengthen processes and to increase public engagement with and awareness of the selective service system. Our recommendations will ensure we have the most qualified and capable individuals to meet national security needs in a national emergency. The changing nature of warfare, including rapid technological advancements, increased use of unmanned systems, and global spanning cyber warfare, has heightened the need for individuals with critical skills. Our commission explored options to draft individuals with these skills and certifications. Ultimately, however, we decided that existing models relied too heavily on individuals' self-assessment, much like that of the to which Tom referred in the USA Jobs self-assessment for applying for a job. We decided that the best way was through a voluntary mechanism like the Critical Skills Individual Ready Reserves program that we're recommending. A qualified and capable force means we must extend the requirement to register the selective service to all Americans, men and women. Leveraging skills of all Americans, regardless of gender, means that the United States military and our country will have access to every single skill that Americans have. Our research found that women are as likely as men to qualify for military service, and ensuring they are part of the registration pool will make our military stronger and more prepared. Both men and women will fill any and all personnel needs as long as they are capable and qualified. Those are two very strong words, and we really support them. America is stronger when we all engage in meeting our obligations of citizenship. And that gets back to the issue of the lack of understanding of our civic responsibilities and why we're placing such emphasis on that it begins in the younger ages of school. Including women in the selective service registration process reaffirms the nation's fundamental belief in a common defense and signals that all Americans may be expected to serve in a national emergency. And now I return the discussion back to our Vice Chair, Commissioner Mata. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. Appreciate it. So now is the fun part of this town hall where we're going to turn it over to some of your questions. I'd like to introduce Dr. Jill Ruff, who is our Director of Research and Analysis. Dr. Ruff, what questions do we have today?
All right, thank you, Deb. And just for everyone's awareness, as Morgan mentioned at the beginning, we had several questions that were submitted in advance via email, so we're going to work through those. Some of them are quite long. I may paraphrase or summarize, and some of them are duplicative. But let's get started. So, Tom, this is probably headed your way. This is about the current pandemic with coronavirus, but also national service. Paul F. Indicates that the UNITE Act, which was introduced on April 13th by Senators Markey and Van Hollen, called upon the government to use furloughed AmeriCorps and Peace Corps volunteers, as well as an expanded volunteer force, to contribute to the current recovery efforts for the pandemic. Is the Commission advocating the utilization of national service to meet these current recovery needs?
Sure, thanks, Jill. Great question. I appreciate that. The legislation that you're referring to, I believe, was introduced after the commission had finalized our final report, so I'm not familiar with its details, but I would say a few things about the concept, and that is this. Number one, obviously the commission favors service, and we talked about having flexibility within federal agencies to be able to be nimble and quick and pivot when needed. So in a situation like this, where you have people in AmeriCorps and Peace Corps, I think this is one area where the council that I mentioned, the Council on Military, National, and Public Service, within the executive office of the president, would be able to work with those agencies, CNCS and the Peace Corps, to be able to put those volunteers to good use in a situation like this. Secondly, we mentioned the online platform, which would have a registration component in which Americans who have skills or the desire to serve would be able to sign up, register, and then be called upon as needed. So I think those are two answers to the question that certainly we would want to see people who are willing and able to be put to use in a situation like this, and those recommendations would help out.
Thanks, Tom. Our next question is directed at you, Mr. Allard. Ed, this is from Paul S., and he has a question about mandatory national service. To the extent that the commission explored mandatory national service, what were the principal objections or obstacles that we found? And if cost was one of the obstacles, would appreciate any thoughts you have on having the program funded by the private sector.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Ruff. As we traveled throughout the nation, we visited all 9 census regions and over 22 states and probably over 40 different cities. We encountered youth, we encountered those people who were previously service members of the military, and frankly, all areas of service, since our commission was charged with that responsibility. As we went through the process, we identified, and we really struggled with this because we had people that were very strong supporters of doing voluntary service. There were some people that supported the aspect of mandatory service, so every American would have a unifying thread that ran through their lives and their career. We also talked with an awful lot of youth because, frankly, I'm probably the elder member of the commission, but the rest of us on the commission, and it's a wonderful bipartisan commission on which I feel very privileged to have had the opportunity to serve. We don't represent the youth, so we tried to talk as we travel across the nation to as many of those that would be directly affected with this, the decisions and recommendations we were making. the bottom line was, and those of us that have children and some of us who have grandchildren understand this, young people like to be encouraged to do things. They do not like to be told to do things. And believe me, that came through loud and clear repeatedly, no matter where we were in a major metropolitan area like Chicago or Los Angeles, or in the smaller communities throughout this wonderful country of ours. We were told that repeatedly. I'm reminded of when I was a young parent trying to figure out how to discipline my children correctly. And I was reminded of a watermelon seed. And a watermelon seed, I don't know if any of you have ever eaten watermelon, but if you hold it and you hold it gently, it will stay there. If you squeeze slightly, it spurts out. And I use that analogy to carry the message forward that people do not like to be pressured into doing things. Now, does that fly? That's why we came up with the concept of trying to make it as voluntary as possible. Now, people might say, well, if you're doing that, then why are you doing the expansion of the registration to women? Frankly, that was another issue with which we struggled as a commission and as individuals on that commission. The bottom line is we have a wonderful nation that has a bevy of talent, and it would seem to be ludicrous to not be able to tap into all of that talent in time of a national emergency. The registration for selective service of women is required. We feel that should be mandatory by virtue of the fact that should the worst case scenario ever occur, and we pray to the good Lord that it does not, that we have the ability to dip into that talent to meet the survival needs of our nation. So I hope that answers the question. We determined that it would be better to come up with mechanisms that enable people to volunteer to serve, and we made many recommendations to take advantage of that voluntary aspect. De Tocqueville, when he visited the country so long ago, was amazed by the ability of Americans and the uniqueness of Americans to come to the aid of others. And that is exactly what de Tocqueville saw, and frankly, folks, that's exactly what we're seeing today, even as we sit sequestered in our own condos or apartments or homes. There are many, many people out there with bruises on their face because of the pressure of the mask that are doing so, not because it's a job, but it's because they're Americans and they're human beings trying to take care of other human beings. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. Deb, the next one is a bit of a follow-up to what Mr. Allen was just discussing. This question comes from Curt B, and he asks, when do you anticipate that the Supreme Court will be making a judgment on whether to change the Military Selective Service Act to require women to register? And what is the likelihood that Congress will pass a law requiring women to register with selective service?
Well, to be honest, I think given the current pandemic, it's not clear. I know that the one of the cases down in Texas, they had the government has appealed, but I suspect that I think it might be more appropriate to check the Supreme Court's calendar to see when the decision would be made by the Supreme Court. But I suspect that the cases are continuing in the courts and will continue until a decision is made or Congress acts. And I guess that gets to the second question of when Congress would act. Not knowing when Congress is coming back, I think I said they are supposed to come back on the 4th, but now we're hearing that they may be delayed again. So it's unclear when Congress will be back in session and whether, in fact, they would take up this issue at an appropriate time. But the commission hopes that given the current situation that we're in, that there is a number of recommendations that we believe could be taken up, especially this year, that would help our country during this current pandemic, and that they would also take up the rest of the recommendations at the appropriate time.
Thanks, Vice Chair Wada. I have a follow-up question for you from Kate C., and it is about JROTC. So the Junior ROTC program claims that it's not a recruitment program. Why are funds to increase the JROTC programs included in the recommendations, since the recommendations also suggest we want to increase military recruitment in schools?
So I can see where that might be a disconnect. There is a clear definition that JROTC program is not a recruitment tool for the military. But what the commission found as we went across the country was lack of knowledge, basic sort of knowledge of our military. We had a number of children that could not even name all 4 branches, or actually 5 if you include the Coast Guard, of the services that currently make up the armed forces. And so what we found was JROTC programs, though, do provide young Americans an understanding, not just of the military services, but sort of their basic education in terms of civics. It provides sort of, because it is a citizenship program, provide that information that a number of young Americans across this country is not getting. And the desire for JROTC programs across this country, particularly in communities that don't have one, still continues to be an issue that the department faces. The commission felt that Junior ROTC, given the number of benefits that it provides both to the individual students and to communities, was worth something that resources should be put against. And that is why we proposed an increase in the number of JROTC units across this country.
Thanks so much, Deb. Tom, this one is for you. The question is from Dean H., and it is, the report does not address a discussion of using the resources and facilities of the United States military to improve opportunities for expanding national service, particularly as it relates to disaster preparedness and recovery. So did the commission consider leveraging facilities and resources of the military and putting them towards CNCS to improve national service programs, particularly on disaster relief?
Thanks, Jill. Thanks for that question. I think I'm trying to understand the question. Did we use the resources of the military to leverage for CNCS? And I think what we have done with our recommendations is tried to find ways that military, national, and public service streams would be able to work together and leverage one another and find strength in one another. So one of the ideas that was put forth is with respect to recruiting or making awareness of opportunities that military recruiters might be able to help with making young people more aware of opportunities in national service or other service opportunities when participants are turned away or found ineligible for military service, by providing them some information, making them aware of those kinds of opportunities. That would be a great way to have a military asset be used for strengthening national service.
And to build on that, Tom, we were frankly a bit shocked to learn that up to 70% of those young people that were willing to volunteer for the military did not meet the standards of the military. So here you have individuals that are more than willing to volunteer to go into the military, but may not be aware of the fact that opportunities in public service and national service exist. So it seems to us a tremendous opportunity for those people who are already willing to volunteer consider these other options. And we were shocked to find that that was not occurring. So that was one of our recommendations, as Tom said.
Thank you both. Ed, this is a follow-up question for you. I know you addressed this in your comments, but we have a couple questions here that are related to maintaining the selective service system. So both from Bill G and from Kate C. Could you talk a little bit more about why the commission chose to maintain selective service as opposed to reallocating those funds to voluntary service programs or eliminating the requirements altogether?
Thank you, Dr. Ruff. That's an excellent question. In as much as the selective service actually has not been required to activate a draft for many, many years. We examined this. We talked to the leadership of the Department of Defense. We talked to military advisors. We talked to civilian advisors as to national security survivor advisors, people who are intimately acquainted with the threats and dangers that exist, not only within the United States, but external to the United States. And frankly, we have threats that exist of which we are not even aware today. There were only a handful of people that probably were aware of the dangers of this pandemic that we find ourselves existing in today. In some instances, we were woefully unprepared to deal with the pandemic, even though there were some people who were standing on the rooftop shouting, "This could happen." Unfortunately, when people are immersed in other activities, they often fail to plan for the worst case scenarios because we as human beings pray they never happen. We hate to see the suffering and misery that even planning for a pandemic would create in terms of human cost, in terms of unexpected. How many ventilators do you need for a nation of over 300 million people? How many hospital facilities do you need? Just the planning of all of that can put a country into a panic situation. We don't want that as a natural occurrence. For example, last night I'm in Los Angeles, California, and as my wife and I were preparing to go to bed, we were reflecting on this, the fact we have not been out of our home for over a month. And just as we were about to turn out the lights, the earth started shaking here in California. Now we looked at each other, and being residents of California, we said, "Oh, it's an earthquake." But can you imagine if that minor earthquake had been a major earthquake on top of this pandemic? Now, who's going to plan for those kinds of things occurring? But I assure you, there are people looking at that. I give you all of that background because we, as a commission, looked at the viability of maintaining the selective service or doing away without it, and trying to live without it. And we determined as a group, a bipartisan group that studied this issue closely, that the risk is too high to do away with the selective service system as it exists today. The registration for the selective service is not a draft. It is preparing for the worst case scenario that we as human beings can imagine. It would be foolish of us, very imprudent of us, very unwise of us not to plan for the worst case scenario. We find ourselves in that situation today, and there are people suffering for our lack of planning and preparation.
Joe, can I just add just a quick summary, I think. From the commission's point of view, I would also say that the retention of the selective service system was, well, one of the consideration was that it has been the only proven processes by which the federal government has used in the past to ensure that we had the manpower we needed to meet the threat that we faced.
Excellent.
Thank you both. And Vice Chair Wada, I know we are running low on time. We won't have time to go through all of the questions that have come in via chat. There are a few folks who are interested in the next steps and a way ahead, both on what is currently in Congress, other pieces of legislation that have been submitted through Congress. Could you address the next steps and then offer a closing summary?
Certainly. The four country caucus, I saw a question about their input, has been supportive of the commission's recommendations, and I believe Representative Panetta has already dropped our legislative proposal as a bill in the House. Expect that we will find similar support in the Senate at some point, with a senator dropping the same legislation on the Senate side. And the commission will continue its engagement with the American people and the public until we shut down. Unfortunately, our event on the 26th was canceled due to the current pandemic, but we have other engagements on calendar. So on April 28th, we'll be hosting a virtual event with the McCain Institute and the Arizona State University to discuss critical roles of service in our country and inspiring the next generation to pursue careers in military, national, and public service. On June 25th, we will be hosting an Inspired to Serve, a path forward at the Department of Interior. Fingers crossed that we will be out of our homes by then. This was scheduled for our March, after our March release, and we've now postponed it to June. So hopefully everybody can either attend or call in or video in at the time. In the meantime, we will continue to engage organizations as best we can, given the limitations that we have. But I would tell everybody that if you want to keep up on what we're doing, I would recommend you go to our website at www.inspiredtoserve.gov and follow us on social media on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Inspired to Serve US. And I just wanted to tell everyone here today, thank you for coming and participating with us on our town hall video. It's a first for me, so it's been pretty exciting and interesting to be able to try to engage people on through the internet and through this new form of communication. I like to be a people person and kind of be like face to face with people. So this has been a little challenging for me, but I appreciate all of your patience and understanding in this unusual time that we face, and that we hope you enjoyed this town hall and keep engaged with us and join us on our path forward. So thank you, everybody, and keep healthy and be safe.
Amen.